All right, while we're waiting for things to dry, I went and sanded the nose cone. You have your seam that goes all the way around it. I just sand it with sandpaper. You can start off with some rough, like a 120, and then kick back to a 220. You don't have to get it really, really smooth. I do suggest going down to a 220 just so that when you do the primer coat, it doesn't look quite so ugly. And when you primer, you're going to see like fuzzy things sticking up. Don't freak out. Those will sand right off as soon as you sand that first coat of primer, and then the second coat goes on and it looks nice and pretty. So we sand the nose cone. Now we've got the launch lug to put on, our shock cord, and I cut our shock cord mount out already. So the launch lug's real easy. Again, we're going to be using the board with the slot in it. You get one of these if you can. You'll find out that they're really fun. You can have somebody in a kid in a wood shop can make it for you with a dado blade. All right. So now we're going to come up 4 inches from the tail of the rocket. And we're going to make our mark. And I'm going to make it large enough that I can see it. Now, there's multiple ways to put the launch lug on. This is actually a cardboard launch lug. One way is to apply glue to the launch lug, stick it on the line at the mark, and hold it until the glue sets up and it doesn't move around. Another way to do it is to apply super glue, hold it there with your finger, do a strip of super glue, or CA glue. I'm going to actually use 5-minute epoxy. I like the strength of epoxy, and it helps fill in some of the voids and the gaps. What I'm going to do is, because it doesn't run, I'm not going to have it running down the side of the tube or anything because it's thick. I'm going to set the launch lug right where I want it, and I'm going to mark the top end of the launch lug too. So now I have the top and the bottom positions marked. So now I can take and mix up my 5-minute epoxy, and it's just a little bit, not a whole lot. Come on, Cap. So we're going to put in a little bit of epoxy. Dribble there. And mix this up really, really good. Now remember, if you're using epoxy, you've got to be careful. If it's a plastic item, epoxy gets hot. I've seen more than one person epoxy a nose cone weight into position to get out the next morning, find out that the nose cone has warped and deformed because of the heat. So if you're doing that, if you have a means of keeping it cool via a water bath, a lot of people take the nose cone, put the weight in it, dribble the epoxy on top of the weight, and drop it into a cup of water. So the nose is in the water to help keep it from getting hot. All right, so we're mixed up really good here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it and I'm going to dab it along my line. I'm going to move it. Now you can see why I like using the epoxy. It's nice and thick. So long as I'm careful, I'm not going to have a mess. Got one little string here I need to wipe off on my body tube. Now I am stopping short of the line on both ends. I don't want to over extend and have epoxy get up into the launch lug. Watch out for strings. Now we just have to drop it on the lines. Make sure we're straight. Got a little excess on one side. Now there's a couple ways to make sure you're straight here. Some people will take and strap a launch rod through and wait for it to dry. I just take and I make sure that I'm straight and level, and then I line up using my little bamboo skewers that I have. Eyeball it. 5-minute epoxy, you got plenty of time to monkey it in place. Eyeball it this way, I'm a little off. There we go. On this side. Okay, so we're looking good now. Now we're just going to let it sit there for the 5 minutes it takes for the epoxy to set up and harden, and then we're good to go. The shock cord mount, I'm also going to epoxy that into place after I glue it. What I like to do is use wood glue for the paper, gluing of the shock cord to it, and then I will glue it with wood glue inside the tube, making sure I'm far enough down to miss the shoulder, and we'll go over this again when we actually do the step. And then a day or two after that's dried, the next day is generally enough for it to dry, I'll mix up a small batch of epoxy and puddle it over the top of the shock cord mount, knowing that it's going to self-level, and that's going to give it a smooth, I'm going to make sure it goes all the way around it, that's going to give it a smooth surface without any pieces of paper sticking up or any edges to catch the streamer coming out of the tube. It's something I had a problem with my first one, was I couldn't figure out why my streamer was getting tore up quickly, and it was catching a small edge that was sticking up, and I never noticed it. So after I got in there with a Dremel and filed it down and put epoxy over the top of it, it stopped doing that. So that's going to be one thing that I'm going to recommend you do, is epoxy. After you glue this in place, put a coat of epoxy over it just to give it a smooth and slick means for the recovery system, the streamer, to come out without snagging it. So we're going to let this dry, and then after it's dry, we're going to go ahead and start setting up for the shock cord. All right, we're up to mounting the shock cord now. We can see that the launch lug is on there. It's nice and tight, looking pretty good. So mounting the shock cord. We'll be using our block again to hold the rocket in place while the glue dries. I like using this bracket that I made. It keeps the rocket at a proper angle. I can point an angle up. Like in the case when I mount the shock cord, I'm always going to angle up, so if there's any glue drizzle, it's going to go down the tube if I don't stand the tube straight up and down. I want the glue to go down the tube, not up into the shoulder where I have to pick it out with a knife or something, because it's going to block the nose cone going in. So we know how long our nose cone is. I always like to use my finger as a gauge. I know I need to go in deeper than my finger. I'm going to use popsicle sticks or anything else I can to get in there and shove down on the lug when I put it in there. I've also got pins I can use. So we're using a Kevlar cord that Apogee sends with it. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can use the paper launch shock cord mount, do the little fold over and everything else. Or you can take and cut a small piece off and make a loop, and then glue that in to the rocket body. And then you just take your shock cord and you loop it, tie a knot, and loop it around it, and you tie a slip knot so it slides down over this, and then tie onto your nose cone. That will actually hold if it's been epoxied into the body. I'm going to use the paper shock cord mount because I actually prefer it at this particular juncture. Yet to use the loop on anything, but a lot of people do use it, so it isn't a possibility for you if it's something you might like. Alright, piece of paper to protect my work area. As you can see, I got a lot of glue on here already from different projects, so I try and keep some of the glue off there if I can help it. Okay, so let's smear a little bit of glue on here. And excess off on the cloth. I go at an angle when I put it in there, because to me it makes it harder to pull out if it's angled in there. Okay, so that's glued. Dab of glue here. Smear it around. And another fold. I also pre-fold the shock cord mount before I actually put the glue in there. Now we're going to pinch and hold it till the glue has a chance to set up. And it kind of squeezes the excess glue. A lot of excess glue is not going to make a strong joint. So you kind of want to squish as much glue out as you can. You'll find out that it'll dry a lot faster. Okay. We're going to let that sit for a couple of seconds. And remember, we've got to get it fairly deep in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the glue on the back of it. And the back of it's the short end. I'm going to put the glue on the back of it, slide it in there with my finger, and then invert and stick it on. So basically, I'm going to slide it in on my finger with the glue on it as far as I can, flip it over, and then push it into place. That way I know I've got it in there deep and I don't have to worry about getting glue in the wrong spot. And then I'm going to hold it there and kind of wiggle my finger around and push it and try and make sure that it's seated in there really, really well. Okay, smear the glue around. Get good coverage. We want to get as much of that covered as we can. Okay, on the finger. You see how I'm holding it? I'm going to also pick up the rocket to make it a little bit easier for me to maneuver. So I'm going to slide it in, flip everything over because I want the launch lug to be opposite of the shock cord. And now, I'm using my finger, I'm supporting with my hand to push and smear that glue around in there. So now, won't be able to see, I doubt it. We've got it down in there pretty deep. So we're going to let that dry overnight. And then tomorrow I'm going to use a popsicle stick to shove, or a wooden dowel, to shove epoxy all the way down there on the shock cord mount. And that way I know that it's not going to snag anything cord-wise as it comes out. So we're going to let it dry overnight before we stick anything in there, even after the epoxy, because if you don't, you might end up with your shock cord stuck. You might end up with your nose cone stuck in there. So it's always a good idea to let that dry overnight after you stick glue in there. And again, tomorrow we'll probably use a popsicle stick. A big one would be nice. And we'll get glue on there and drizzle it over. And remember, the epoxy will self-level itself, so it's really neat the way that works. All right, the shock cord mount has had overnight to dry now. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover that white glue. Remember, we glued this in with white glue. We're going to epoxy it in there now so that it'll take away any of that roughness or the possibility of something snagging that. Epoxy will kind of self-level and cover it quite nicely. So we've got our little mixer. What I've done is I've stuck my finger in there with a mixer stick until I knew I was right past the mark, and then I slid my stick right up to the tip of my finger, and then I looked at it and I marked the stick. So now I know how deep I have to go with the epoxy. I'd rather do this with a little bit larger a stick. I might take and do a little trick here I've done before. Take 2 sticks and tape them together real quick. It's not the best method, but when you only have small popsicle sticks, it works. So I can go like this and put the other stick right next to it. That gives me a little bit bigger of a scoop surface there to slide this in there with. Now, I'm not going to hold distance with the tape because I obviously have to be able to get the glue on the end. This will just kind of hold it together for me so I can use it as a large tongue depressor. Alright, so let's go ahead and mix up some epoxy. So, there we go. Not going to take a whole lot to do this, but I'm actually mixing a little bit more than I need. It's easier to have extra than not enough. It's about time to buy some more epoxy. Okay. So mix this up now. little cool, so it's kind of stiff. And I'm going to do something to make it easier to get the epoxy out of the cup. Okay. Now, get everything set up. Let's go ahead and put this plastic down so we don't get epoxy or anything. Now remember, after we do this, we're going to leave the rocket horizontal until the epoxy's had time to set up, because we don't want it to run down the inside of the tube. We want it to harden on top of the shock cord mount. Okay, so now I can scoop it with my big scoopy thing. And we're going to go right inside there to our mark and flip it over and smear. Okay. Got in there. Get a little bit more and smear some more in there. Okay, let's see how well that looks. Alright. Kind of hard for you to see what I'm doing. It's kind of hard for me to see what I'm doing inside this tube. I have to keep holding a little flashlight into it. Okay. Now it's just a matter of getting a little bit into some of the other areas in there. So that's basically how we do it. And then we're going to let this dry at least 24 hours before we even think about putting the shock cord in there, because it takes the 5-minute epoxy about a day to actually fully harden to where something won't stick to it if it's laid on top of it for, you know, a half hour or hour. So we're going to leave it horizontal, sitting horizontal for about 24 hours before we go in there and start stuffing the shock cord in and doing our prep work. Alright, what I'm set up to do now is we're going to apply the Mylar streamer to our shock cord. In the instructions, it really doesn't have a measurement of how far down we should be applying this shock cord. It just basically shows it being attached to the Kevlar shock cord. And we're going to attach it securely so it doesn't come off. There's a few different ways to do this. Some people use duct tape, other people use just other different means. So I'm going to use Scotch tape, and the way I do this is kind of funny. I'm going to take a piece of tape, and I actually cut that too short. I'm going to let's go ahead and weight this right there. So that's going to keep that still so that I can work on it without it rolling around on me. I'm going to weight it down so I can get a length. Whoop. Alright, so I'm going to pull a piece that's longer than the Mylar. I'm going to slide it underneath the end, about halfway up the tape, and I'm just going to press the Mylar down into the tape. I'm trying to keep it flat as I can. Okay, now I'm going to take either an X-Acto or scissors in this case, and I'm going to trim it up to the corner at a slight angle, and then straight up the edge of the Mylar. That's going to get thrown away. That's going to get thrown away. You can trim it after you mount it. I like trimming it before I fold it over and mount it. I'm going to come a couple inches down from the nose cone, and I'm going to stick that right on the edge of the tape and the Mylar. And I'm going to go ahead and push it down so we've got good adhesion to the tape and the Mylar. Now I'm going to, starting in the center, fold the Mylar and the tape over, or just the tape actually, over. I'm going to try and make sure that I'm just getting the tape over the top of the Mylar and I'm not getting any wrinkles in here. I can kind of back it off if we need to and reposition. But the idea is to have 0 wrinkles and full adhesion to the tape. Okay, there we go. So now I've got that tape there. I'm going to take my fingernail and I'm going to run it right up to the edge and I'm going to push up against the Kevlar cord and seal that edge hard and tight. And I'm going to push down on the Mylar. Flip it over, do the same thing. Push it right up against the edge. Right up against the edge. We want to make sure we got that sealed in there nice and tight. Now I'm going to beef up that edge a little bit more. I'm going to take, and again we're going to trim, so we're just inside this time. I don't want to be too awfully long, so I'm going to trim it off just a little bit on the inside. And now I'm going to go a little bit more than half. You can see there's a little bit of a hangover. Maybe that'll help you see how much tape is hung over, but it's not a whole lot, maybe an 1/8 of an inch of hangover. This is more to hold the tape to the Mylar. And again, we're going to push it right up against that Kevlar cord and get that in there tight. Then we're going to flip it over. What little bit's there, we're going to fold over the top of the shot cord and we're going to seal that down. Now we're going to do the other side the same exact way. Flip it over. Let's pull our tape a little longer than we need. And I'm trimming off both ends because you have the teeth marks from the tear off on the dispenser. And I don't like that because to me it's a spot where it can pull loose. Now we're going to go down more on the Mylar than we are on the shot cord in this case. Yep, come on. And we're going to set it down. And again, this is just to tape the Mylar and the tape together. I'm not trying to attach the shot cord to this part. We've already done that. I'm just trying to reinforce my connection to the Mylar. So we have a large overlap. And we're going to push it right up against the shot cord and the Mylar. And we're going to flip back over the other side. We're going to fold it over. Now you can, if you want, do it one more time, and this time split it halfway again, where we're going to go half on the Mylar, or just basically we're splitting everything in half, so it's going to wrap completely over the top of the Mylar and the tape right down the center. Push it right up against it, get it nice and tight. Flip her over, bring her over the top, nice and tight. A little bit of a wrinkle there. Let's try and force that out. There we go. And I'm kind of creasing, like you'd crease paper. I'm pinching that tape tight onto the Mylar. Now we're still doing the construction, so we'll go ahead and just tighten this Mylar back up. Just roll it tight around your fingers. We're going to stuff everything back into the body tube. I do tend to carry extra streamers on hand. If you get a fast ejection, it hangs up on the way out, you'll rip your Mylar. They do make cloth streamers. Problem with the cloth streamer is it's not, for this particular rocket, is it's not going to be reflective, and you'd have to go wider than this. You'd have to go, this is the 4-inch Mylar. You'd have to go wider than 4-inch to see something that's not reflective. So I'm going to go ahead and keep with the Mylar here. You can upgrade to cloth if you want. Ripstop nylon is great. I'm taking the rubber band that came with the Mylar and I'm putting it around it. And it's going to roll back open, but that's okay because now it's not going to completely unroll. Just remember, you have to take that rubber band off before you launch the rocket. Otherwise, it's going to come straight down pretty quick. And we'll tuck this in there. Again, remember I epoxied the shot cord mount in there, and I can feel it with my finger. It's super smooth, so there's nothing for anything to catch on. You can daisy chain your shot cord when you actually get ready to launch. and then roll up your streamer like I did here and put the rubber band around. When you get to this point, you can pop the rubber band off or just cut it with a pair of scissors, shove it the rest of the way in. I taped this on again. That's going to help make sure that that knot stays secure. And then there's no slippage there by chance. Slide the nose cone on in. Now, one thing I do when I prep for paint is I'm going to take my blue painter's tape and I'm going to do one lap around the nose cone, and I'm going to come down just a bit from the top shoulder because I actually want a little bit of paint to get on that shoulder. This kind of hides the gap where the nose cone and the body tube meet. So by painting a little bit there, and we'll tear it off, make sure it's nice and smooth, and we'll slide it in. So now when I paint, I'll get just a little bit of paint there, and that's going to help kind of hide the seam there. You'd be surprised how much the little translucent plastic will show through that seam.